Hi, my name is Jane Smith. I'm president of the East Shore Schroon Lake Association and also involved in the Adirondack Lakes Alliance. We've been working a lot with this program. I'm not as good a speaker as some of these people, so I'm going to read because I tend to ramble and get off subject. So I'm going to speak more to Brittany's point about partnerships and collaboration, because that's what we found to be very, very effective in setting up our program. Initially, our program was staffed by volunteers from ESLA, trained by Paul Smith's Adirondack Watershed Institute. The Lake George Association gave us guidance and provided us with materials needed to start our program, and we were off and running, adjusting as we went. The Lake George Association, of course, as y'all know, is a larger association near us, and I went down there and said, we're talking about a lake steward program. What do we do? And they said, here, here, here. This is what you do. This is what you can take with you. And we were off and running, thanks to them. So collaboration and partnership, again, is a great, great tool. In 2010, we had proven to our local government the value of the lake stewardship outreach and education value. We partnered then with the town of Horicon to place a paid steward at the DEC launch on Schroon Lake. Eventually, with additional monies provided by Warren County, the town of Horicon was able to double the funding for the program. We could now employ 8 stewards by increasing funding from $16,000 to $32,000 a year. These town and county funds are equally divided between Schroon, and that's the Horicon launch. It's at the southern end of Schroon Lake, and Brant Lake, which is wholly within the town of Horicon. Over a 4-year period, the town of Horicon and Warren County have invested over $100,000 in Schroon Lake, Horicon, and Brant Lake steward programs. So, you know, it's a big expense and something we couldn't have done without their financial support, which also the insurance is taken care of because the stewards are paid for through the town, so it's all covered. The fringes, everything. The respective lake associations provide supervision, their uniforms, stations set up, and all educational materials. Paul Smith's Adirondack Watershed Institute provides the training each year for us, as well as a number of neighboring lake steward and volunteer supervisor programs in our area. In 2015 and again this season, they will provide the Adirondack Lake and River Steward programs who do not employ Paul Smith stewards directly the use of their tablets and programming, which is a great thing because continuity, as the prior speakers have said, is what is very important. At the Horicon launch, 4 stewards work on a rotating basis, ensuring none work over a 40-hour week, because that's something within the town that they can't pay overtime, and so you have to manage that kind of thing very carefully. We provide 7-day coverage from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Friday through Sundays, with adjustments for inclement weather as well as holiday weekends. The pay rate is set by the town at $10.50 per hour in past years, and we're thinking it may stay there, may go up a little bit. Our stewards at the Horicon DEC launch inspect approximately 2,000 vessels, only a portion of the watercraft that come through that launch. We estimate that there are probably upwards of 3,000 watercraft launching and retrieving in a season. ESLA and the town of Horicon participated in the park-wide spread prevention decontamination pilot program last year. The funds for the ecosystem, which is a self-contained system wash station, were secured because we had the foresight when we wrote our Schroon Lake management plan to build in what we thought was up and coming, which were decon stations. So we were able to get within our grant, within our Department of State grant, our ECOS system paid for. The cost of operating the regional decontamination station is a portion between 3 towns. Schroon Lake happens to be within the limits of 3 townships and 2 counties. So it's a little challenging sometimes to get everybody on the same page, but again, the partnership is just absolutely amazing. It works. Everybody's always on the same page. ESLA is kind of an example of, in a perfect world, this is how it goes, because we're able to start our program because the Lake George Association said, here you go, this is what you need, go ahead and do it, and ask us if you need any help. We're able to keep our program afloat because of the relationship we built and foster with larger associations and agencies, and that's very important. The Lake George Association, APIP, which happens to be our local PRISM, the Lake George Lake Champlain Regional Planning Board, the Lake Champlain Basin Program, and Paul Smith College, and the Lake George Park Commission have been, that's what it's taken to keep our program going, to get it going, to keep it going, to keep it running smoothly, and to try to hopefully pay it forward and help other organizations. We sustain our programs because the town of Horicon and Warren County are leaders in understanding collaboration and partnering with their local lake and river associations for the protection of their waterways and therefore their economies. Both the town and county readily see the value in the collective effort of county and town working together with the volunteer forces of their lake and river associations. As the slide shows, Matt Simpson is our town supervisor, and he's been known to come down and fill in for an hour or two at the boat launch and be a steward when it's needed. So that's the kind of cooperation that we are very, very fortunate to have. This all didn't just come about. We started as an association. Bill McGee, who was in the audience, was the president prior to me of our association, and we both said, you know, we can't just show up at the town board and say, we want. So we became involved first with the town boards, found out what it takes to have all this happen, and sure enough, they were on board with what we wanted when we needed it. So it's, you know, don't wait until it's, I want some money to run these stewards. Become involved in the town board. Let them understand who you are and what you're about, and that you're not just coming for a handout to this meeting and then not coming back. We're very fortunate to be one of the recipients of the grant. Again, I'm a cheerleader for the Lake George Association because very helpful in helping us where we don't have grant writers. We knew nothing about writing a grant, but they said, we can help you with whatever we can help you with, and they did. So my point is, and my takeaway for y'all is, build good relationships. If you do that, the collaboration, the partnerships that the gals in front of me have talked about is what the key is. Thank you. Any questions? Yes?
Jane, you talked about how the lake associations are still providing certain support to the program in terms of setups and uniforms and training and so on. How are you doing program management now? Because obviously over time this becomes more complicated to do purely on a volunteer basis.
Correct. Fortunately, we have some folks who have started the program, taken it on, and we have a great guy that's doing it right now that manages. It's all volunteer. Since we were fortunate enough to get the grant, we're now talking to Paul Smith College about the Watershed Institute about maybe hiring the Paul Smiths, or the Paul Smiths people hiring our stewards, because we have some great stewards who have been here back year after year. They love the job. They're great ambassadors to the town. So we're looking into that right now. It may or may not happen, but volunteers in lake associations contribute more than anybody realizes in time.
So can you describe your volunteers? Are they teenagers or?
Our volunteers our stewards are paid by the town.
Oh.
Our volunteers are the people who administer, who supervise. They are members of our lake association, but our stewards are paid by the town. Yes, sir.
Jane, you said, $32,000 for 8 stewards. Does that include the decon station as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And your volume, again, was about 2,000 at your launch?
Beg pardon?
Your volume?
Volume, yes, is about 2,000 that we see. And of course, we're not there 24/7, but we're there, you know, we research the data and decide when is the best time to be there.
Size of your lake?
Size of our lake, 9 miles long, and Bill, how many acres?
Is it 4,000?
I think so, yeah.
Number of launch sites?
There, one on the end, we have 2 state campgrounds that both have sites, and a northern village launch, so 4. Yeah, but we, as ESLA, are only in charge of the one launch at the southern end.
And you have 8 stewards for 8?
That rotate, not at one time.
But they're all
to cover.
at just that one launch site?
Correct. Correct. Well, no, I'm sorry, that's wrong. They are at 2 launch sites. 4 of them are in Brant Lake, which is a smaller lake within the town of Horicon, and then the others are at Schroon Lake.
If I can ask one more question, is there any inspection going on at the campsites?
Not at this time that we know of.
That's a question for our DEC press.
Yeah.
When are we going to get the campsites involved?
Yeah. Well, and it's tough for them because, and we've talked to our local DEC people, and when they have campers coming in for the weekend and going out, it's a tough nut to crack to say, okay, y'all can't, you got the kids in the car, but you can't go in and get your campsite because we have to do this. So we've kind of talked about maybe the volunteers from our lake association could go to those nearby campsites and help out with that sort of thing, but it's something that's a work in progress. Like all of our programs are really still a work in progress.
I am Kristen Rohne, Director of Education for the Lake George Association. So the program I'm going to talk about is our Lake Steward program, which is not the current program on Lake George. So we do have a current mandatory inspection program on Lake George, but we wouldn't be where we are today if it wasn't for our Lake Steward program that we started back in 2008. I didn't get involved in the program until 2009, so I can't really speak to the actual getting it off the ground and running, but I did coordinate the program from 2009 until 2013, and then in 2014 is when the Lake George Park Commission took over because they are our regulatory agency on Lake George and switched over to the mandatory program. So with our Lake Steward program on Lake George, we focus mainly on 4 to 5 launches. Those are our high traffic launches on Lake George. There's over 100 boat launches and access sites on Lake George. We have a mix of everything. We have campground launches, DEC launches, town launches, private launches, homeowners association launches, people's backyard launches. We have it all. So we know we couldn't, we had to prioritize. And so that's a really big thing if you have a lot of launches, is to prioritize those launches. And we were able to easily figure out those high traffic launches. And those high traffic launches were a mix of private and state launches and town launches as well. So the big thing is, how do we do it and what does it cost? So our steward program is a mix of funding throughout the years. Each year wasn't always the same, so most of it was grant funded. If we didn't have grant funded, then we had to go to other sources. So each year was a new set of headaches. How are we going to do it? How much money do we have? How many stewards can we hire? Where do we put them? How long can we have them there? So that's just kind of the basics that you see here. We've ranged anywhere from 4 stewards on staff up to 12 stewards. So it's definitely a mix each year. The number of launches we covered was also a mix. And how many days a week? We eventually, in 2013, got to 7-day-a-week coverage, 13 hours a day at our high traffic launches. So that was a lot of work, a lot of scheduling, and lots of stewards. So our target of starting was always Memorial Day weekend. So we always hired college students. That's how we did our stewards. So luckily with the Lake George Association, we do have a full-time paid staff. So we have paid staff to coordinate the program, and then we were able to hire summer staff through the association itself to pay them and do it that way. So we would always start, we would try Memorial Day in 2013 when we really had a lot of funding. We ramped it up and started at the beginning of May. The current program on Lake George is, we start May 1st. So you can see just how we got our funding each year. So Lake George Association, we are mostly grant funded. We are a membership organization as well, but most of our programs and things is grant funding. So I learned very quickly how to write grants. It's a lot of fun once you figure it out. So I had no background, no training in grant writing, and I just went off and running. So mostly everything I do came from a grant somewhere that I wrote. So it's a lot of time, but that's what winter's for. Our program got started in 2008 thanks to the Lake George Watershed Coalition. So we do have a coalition on Lake George. It's all our nonprofits, towns, it's a mix of all the organizations working to protect Lake George. So each year that organization gets together, picks priorities, and we put in a grant to the Department of State. So that's how the program got up and running. We used the Paul Smith's AWI protocol. They're really the ones that we got all the info from, and the Lake Champlain Basin program. So they gave us the information, and then of course we're sharing it with Jane, as you heard. So that's how we got started. You can see 2010, we kind of had a dip in funding. So we get a lot of funding from the Lake Champlain Basin program. That was kind of our main funder to support our Lake Steward program. So Lake George does flow into Lake Champlain, so that is to our benefit that we do get some Lake Champlain funding. 2010, we did not have that funding with the grant cycle. It came late. So we had to reach out to our towns in 2010. So the town of Hague was one of the sites that we had a boat launch steward, and they didn't want to lose that boat launch steward. So they chipped in for the program that year. And then the town of Bolton Landing, it's run by their development corporation, that boat launch. It's kind of a town launch. It's a private, it's an interesting setup there, that boat launch, but they also chipped in so that we could continue to have a lake steward at that location as well. So it's really been a mix of funding over the years to continue this program. Where does the funding go? Mostly it's staff time, coordination of the program. We've done it all different ways. We've had an assistant coordinator, so the project coordinator is really my time. It's, you know, the Lake Steward program is not the only thing I do, so it was a portion of my time. So some years we had an assistant coordinator to fully devote to data collection and ID of species that were removed from boats and things like that. Some years with less funding we didn't go that route with the assistant coordinator. And then the lake stewards themselves. We were paying our lake stewards $10 an hour. If they returned for a second season, they got a 50-cent raise, so $10.50 an hour. Our assistant coordinators were paid $11 an hour. So I know that's a lot less than a lot of the stewards are getting paid nowadays. I've seen anywhere from $13 to $15 an hour for stewards. So these numbers were based on that, that we were paying them back then. Food, travel, things like that, that's mostly based on training. So we would go to Paul Smith College with our stewards each year for training. I would do a week-long training with them before we sent them out to the launches. Supplies and setup, so we did, you know, the same setup with chairs, tents, tables, materials to hand out. So each year we do have printing costs to print rack cards and things like that. So that's just kind of the breakdown of you know, how we what our costs were. And so how do you justify these costs? Well, you can look at, you know, what it's costing us per boat. So per boat inspected, $10 a boat. I mean, it's not that much a huge cost to prevent invasives from coming out of our entering our lakes. We look at the cost per invasive species removed. So, you know, it's $610, but it's $610 that saved us from a water chestnut infestation or quagga mussels. And so we have seen invasive species coming on boats that we don't already have in Lake George. So those are our saves. We know we didn't introduce that invasive species to Lake George. So we can definitely justify that $600 cost for how many millions it would have cost us in management if we ended up with that invasive species. Our at-risk boats, it's kind of a term we use as boats that came from other places in the last 2 weeks. So we do get a lot of just Lake George boaters in and out of Lake George constantly. So we have a number of at-risk boats, those boaters coming from other water bodies. And so, you know, $80 a boat for those boaters that are really our threat to bring new invasives into our waterways. And so just some different ways to look at and justify and kind of explain, you know, the costs instead of saying, you know, we need $20,000 to fund a lake steward. Well, you know, it's $10 a boat to prevent new invasions from coming in.
How is Lake George doing with the Asian clam?
We're doing. We are currently managing one site of Asian clam at the DEC Rogers Rock campground. So there's been matting all winter. With that, those mats will be coming out and we will assess that shortly. There's been some great research going on. We have a lot of research happening. Matting is just not successful. They do come back. So we haven't found a good management technique at this point. So, yes.
Do you pay them when you train them?
Yes, we do pay them for training. Yep. Yep.
Your data run through 2013. What about the decon stations? Have you generated stats and costs and so on?
Yep, that information does exist. That program's not run through us at the Lake George Association. It is run through the Lake George Park Commission. So it's available online from the Park Commission. They have reports, just like we report it out each year. So they do have costs on running the decon stations and what the program's costing them now. Yep. Yep.
The park agency is also paying for the Asian clam part? It's not your organization that's paying for that?
We're paying for a portion of it, yeah. Yep, we fund.
That's up into hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yep, we fund portions of the management, the Eurasian water milfoil management, Asian clam management. We will be running a steward program this coming year and next year as well. So we did get funding from the DEC grants. So my focus is going to be we have 2 town launches that are not covered. They're not inspection stations under the current mandatory inspection program. You still have to go to an inspection station before you can go to those boat launches. But we're going to have lake stewards set up at those launches, checking boats on exit. So my focus now is boats leaving Lake George, which protects all of you. So we're going to, so we're going to be doing a focus at those launches with boats coming out of Lake George and really focusing on those boats leaving Lake George cleaned and drained. So that's where our funding is going to be going this year for those programs. Have we seen a decrease in invasive species removed from boats since we've had the decon stations? And we have not. I believe the percentage has stayed right around the same. It's about a 1%. 2%, the number of boats coming in with invasive species.